I still remember the exact moment my life shattered. It wasn't a slow crack. It was like a controlled demolition. 1 minute, everything looked perfect on the outside. The next, the foundation was gone, the walls were crumbling, and I was standing in the rubble, holding a single, damning text message. It was a Thursday evening. October 14th, 2019. We were having dinner at our house in Greenwood Lakes, that fancy little bubble outside Chicago where everyone pretends their lives are as perfect as their lawns. My husband, Mark, had just closed a huge deal. His parents, Robert and Eleanor Miller, were over, along with one of his key business partners, a man named Mr. Henderson, and his wife. The dining room was perfect. Mahogany table gleaming, crystal glasses sparkling, a centerpiece of ridiculously expensive flowers I'd spent an hour arranging. I'd cooked for 2 days, a fancy roast, all the trimmings. I wore the dress Mark liked, smiled the smile expected of the successful businessman's wife. Mark was holding court at the head of the table, laughing, telling stories about the deal, his parents beaming with pride. Robert, his father, a man who believed the world revolved around his wallet, kept nodding approval. Eleanor, his mother, elegant and cold, watched it all with a look that said, "This is exactly as it should be. Our son is a king." They barely acknowledged me, except to compliment the food in a way that felt more like praising the hired help. My phone was in the kitchen. I rarely checked it during dinner, but Mark's was on the table right next to his wine glass. It was probably 8:17 p.m. I know because I looked at the antique clock on the mantelpiece right after it happened. His phone buzzed, not a discreet vibrate. A loud, annoying buzz that made everyone pause. Mark reached for it instantly, a reflex. His fingers fumbled for a second, and in that second, the screen lit up, facing me just slightly. The notification popped up. It was from Jessica. No last name, just Jessica. And the message, "Can't wait to feel you inside me again." My breath hitched. My heart didn't just pound. It stopped, then lurched into a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. My eyes flicked from the screen, to Mark's face, to the faces around the table. Mark froze. His eyes went wide, then narrowed, not in surprise at the message, but in pure, cold panic at being caught. He snatched the phone up, flipped it over onto the table, face down. "Just work stuff," he mumbled, his voice a little too loud, too quick. "Spam." No one else seemed to have seen it. Mr. Henderson was mid-chew. Mrs. Henderson was nodding politely. Robert was taking a sip of wine. Eleanor? Eleanor was watching Mark, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Did she see? Did she know? I couldn't speak. The food in my mouth turned to ash. The perfect dining room felt like a stage where I was the only one who knew the play had just turned into a horror show. I wanted to scream, to overturn the table, to run, but I was Sarah Miller, the perfect wife, so I just sat there, frozen. My smile felt like it was cracking my face. The dinner ended eventually. The Millers and the Hendersons left, thanking us for the lovely evening. "Such a gracious host, Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said, completely oblivious. It felt like a sick joke. The minute the door closed, the air in the house changed. It went from strained politeness to thick, suffocating tension. Mark didn't even wait for me to say anything. He rounded on me, his face twisted with anger, not guilt. "You saw that, didn't you?" he hissed, already on the offensive. I finally found my voice shaky but laced with icy fury. "Jessica? Can't wait to feel you inside me again. What in God's name, Mark?" He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Oh, come on, Sarah. It's nothing." "Nothing? That's nothing to you. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She's just a colleague. Things got a little out of hand. He was lying. Every word was a lie. His eyes darted away. His body language screamed guilt, but his mouth was spewing the familiar script of denial and minimization. A colleague who wants to feel you inside her? That's not a little out of hand, Mark. That's a full-blown affair. He started yelling then. The gaslighting began. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're being hysterical. It meant nothing. You're the one I love. You're my wife. He tried to hug me. I recoiled as if he were on fire. The man who had just been exposed as cheating on me in my own house in front of his parents and his business partner had the audacity to try and touch me, to soothe me with lies. I spent the next few days in a daze. Mark was alternating between being overly solicitous, trying to make up for it, and being withdrawn and annoyed that I wasn't over it yet. He kept insisting it was just a one-time thing, a moment of weakness. But that text felt too familiar, too casual for a first time. My gut was screaming. So, when he was working late one night, I did something I never thought I was capable of. I went through his phone, his work computer, his car, and I found everything. Hundreds of texts, not just with Jessica, but with her last name, Jessica Reynolds. Dates, times, places. Weekend trips, he told me, were business conferences, hotel reservations, extravagant gifts, jewelry, designer bags, charged to a separate credit card I didn't know about. Photos I wish I could unsee. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. It had been going on for over a year, maybe longer. As I dug deeper, I noticed Jessica Reynolds wasn't just some random woman Mark met at a bar. Her name was mentioned in some of his business emails. Not as a client or a peer, but differently. I vaguely remembered seeing her once or twice at large company holiday parties, always hovering near Mark, but I dismissed it. She was younger, very put together, confident in a way I hadn't felt in years. Then I found something else. A photo, buried deep in his cloud storage. It was from a family function. Mark's parents were in the background, and there, standing right next to Mark, smiling directly at the camera, was Jessica. She wasn't just his mistress. She was someone known, someone in their circle. Maybe not a close friend, but someone familiar. That added a sickening layer of betrayal. It wasn't just a secret life. It was a life he was integrating, subtly, into the world I thought was ours. The full truth hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the scale of the deception, the length of time, the casual cruelty of it all. And knowing Jessica was someone he knew outside of just a fling made it worse. When I confronted him again, armed with the evidence, Mark's denial crumbled, replaced by cold indifference and then outright hostility. Fine. You happy now? You found out. Yes, I'm seeing her. So what? His mask was off. The charming, successful husband was gone, replaced by a petty, cruel man. So what? Mark, we're married. What about our life? What about me? Our life is boring, Sarah. You're boring. All you do is tend to the house and play hostess. Jessica understands me. She challenges me. She's not you. Those words, they cut deeper than the affair itself. I had given up my career, my passion for interior design, to support his ambitions, to build this life, to be the perfect wife and mother if we'd had kids, which he kept postponing. And he was throwing it back in my face, using my sacrifice as a weapon against me. I tried to reason. I tried to beg. I talked about counselling. He just laughed. Counselling? Don't be ridiculous. This is who I am now. You can either deal with it or not. He became more brazen. He started staying out later and later. Sometimes he didn't come home at all, barely bothering to text some flimsy excuse. He stopped pretending. He didn't hide his phone anymore. He talked about Jessica openly, comparing her to me, always unfavourably. Jessica thinks my ideas are brilliant. You just nod. Jessica helped me with that presentation. What do you do all day? Jessica looks amazing in that dress. You should try harder. It was emotional abuse. Constant, grinding, chipping away at my self-worth. And the worst part was the financial control. Mark had always handled all the money. I had access to a joint account for household expenses and a credit card, but my own savings were long gone, spent on renovating the house, supporting us when his business was just starting. Now he started tightening the leash. The joint account balance was always low. The credit card limits were slashed. When I needed money for anything beyond groceries or utilities, I had to ask him. And he'd question every single expense. What's this charge from the bookstore? You have enough books. Why do you need new shoes? The ones you have are fine. Going out to lunch with your friend. What a waste of money. He wasn't just controlling, he was trying to make me feel powerless. You think you can leave? He'd sneer. Where would you go, Sarah? You haven't worked in 15 years. You have no money of your own. You're completely dependent on me. And he was right. That was the horrifying truth. I was trapped in a gilded cage, and he held the key, which was my access to any money. His parents, Robert and Eleanor, added another layer of misery. They knew. Maybe not about Jessica specifically at first, but they definitely knew Mark was unhappy and looking elsewhere. And they didn't care about me. Their only concern was the family name, the family business, and Mark's success. Eleanor would make pointed comments. Mark works so hard, Sarah. He needs a wife who can keep up. Or, some women just aren't cut out for this lifestyle. They get comfortable. She even dared to say, maybe if you focused more on Mark's needs, he wouldn't have to find companionship elsewhere. Robert was more direct in his own way. He'd talk about the importance of appearances, of maintaining their social standing. He'd remind me of how much Mark had given me, how lucky I was to be part of their family. It was a constant reinforcement of my perceived lower status and dependence. One day, Robert called me when Mark was out of town. Sarah, he said, his voice flat and cold, let's be realistic. This situation with Mark is disruptive. If you make things difficult, if you try to fight him, you will regret it. We will make sure you walk away with absolutely nothing. Do you understand? It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The Millers took care of their own, and I wasn't their own. I was an inconvenience. I felt completely isolated. My old friends, mostly mutual acquaintances through Mark, slowly drifted away. Some were uncomfortable, some chose sides, Mark's side, of course. Some I just didn't have the energy to pretend with anymore. I was alone in that big, beautiful house, drowning in debt I couldn't control and despair I couldn't escape. I hit rock bottom in the spring of 2020. The world was dealing with a pandemic, and my own personal world had shrunk to the size of this miserable house and Mark's increasingly cruel treatment. He was barely home, using the pandemic as an excuse to stay working, probably with Jessica, while I was left alone, constantly worried about money, constantly feeling worthless. One afternoon, I needed money for a prescription. My credit card was maxed out. The joint account was empty. I called Mark hesitantly, asking for a small amount. He sighed audibly, as if I was the biggest burden in the world. Can't it wait, Sarah? I'm in a meeting. Mark, it's my medication. I need it today. Fine. I'll send you a pittance, but don't bother me with trivial things like this again. Get your own money if you need so much." He hung up on me. That call was a breaking point. It wasn't the affair anymore. It was the sheer, soul-crushing control. The way he treated me like a beggar, someone who had no right to even basic necessities, despite spending years building a home for him, supporting his career, putting his needs above my own. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were sunken, my shoulders slumped. I looked defeated, like a ghost in my own life. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. A hot, sharp flicker of pure anger ignited in the pit of my stomach. Why was I letting this man, who had betrayed me, lied to me, humiliated me, and was actively trying to ruin me, control my life? Why was I allowing his parents, who saw me as disposable, dictate my worth? I had sacrificed my career because I believed in us. I believed in marriage. I believed in the future we were building. I had loved him, maybe blindly, maybe foolishly. But that love was dead now, choked out by lies and cruelty. All that was left was the bitter taste of injustice and a simmering rage. I thought about Robert Miller's threat. "We will make sure you walk away with absolutely nothing." A cold, hard resolve settled over me. Nothing. They wanted me to have nothing. I would show them nothing. I would show them what happens when you push someone too far. They thought I was weak, dependent, stupid. They were about to find out how wrong they were. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But the anger was a fire that warmed me, gave me strength. I looked at my reflection again, still tired, but the eyes were different. There was a spark, determination. "Enough," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. "This is enough." I wasn't going to just survive anymore. I was going to fight back. I wasn't going to let them break me. I was going to break them. I wasn't going to walk away with nothing. I was going to take back everything they tried to steal from me, my dignity, my financial independence, my future, and I was going to do it in a way they would never see coming. They wanted a war? I would give them one. A silent war, a strategic war. My first step was the hardest, asking for help. Mark had isolated me so effectively. But there was one person I trusted, a distant cousin named Emily, who lived across the country. I called her, told her everything. She listened without judgment, her fury mirroring mine. She didn't have much money, but she offered moral support and, crucially, a small emergency fund she could wire me if I needed it, just enough for initial consultations. Finding the right legal team was paramount. Mark and his family had resources, power, and likely the best lawyers money could buy. I couldn't go to anyone timid. I needed sharks, but sharks I could trust. Emily helped me research. I looked for lawyers specializing in complex high-net-worth divorce cases, particularly those involving hidden assets and financial fraud. It felt like searching for a unicorn. After weeks of quiet online research and burner phone calls from a local library, I found a name that kept coming up: Attorney David Chen. His reputation was legendary. He took on difficult cases, went head-to-head with big firms, and, people whispered, had a knack for uncovering financial secrets. His fees were astronomical, but the initial consultation was free. I used Emily's emergency fund to book a cheap motel room for a night downtown so I could meet him without Mark knowing. Mr. Chen's office was minimalist, serious. He was a man of few words, sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. I laid it all out: the affair, the emotional abuse, the financial control, Robert Miller's threat. I showed him the evidence I'd already found: the texts, the photos, the hidden credit card statements. He listened, impassive. When I finished, the silence stretched. I braced myself for him to tell me I didn't have a chance. Instead, he leaned forward. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice calm, "what you've described isn't just a messy divorce. This is a pattern of control, potential financial coercion, and, given your husband's business and your father-in-law's reputation, there could be more layers." He looked at the evidence I'd gathered. "This is a good start," he said. "But to fight someone like Mark Miller and his family, we need everything. We need to understand their entire financial structure. We need forensic accounting. We need a private investigator." He recommended 2 people, Ms. Evelyn Reed, a forensic accountant renowned for untangling complex financial webs, and Mr. Frank Wallace, a private investigator who worked quietly and got results. The cost was terrifying. But Attorney Chen looked me in the eye. "They think you're defenseless," he said. "That's their biggest mistake. Your intimate knowledge of their lives, their habits, their secrets. That's your advantage. You are not defenseless, Mrs. Miller. You are underestimated, and that is a powerful weapon." That was the moment I knew I had the right team. The secret operation began. It felt like I was living a double life, which, ironically, Mark had been doing all along. While outwardly I maintained the facade of the withdrawn, slightly depressed wife, inwardly I was a spy in my own home. My job was to provide clues. Anything I'd ever heard Mark or his father talk about, names of companies I didn't recognise, trips that seemed unusually long, odd visitors, large packages arriving, specific banks or investment firms they mentioned, even casual remarks about business deals or strategies. I started carrying a small notebook and pen, or using a secure hidden notes app on my phone, jotting down everything I overheard. Mr. Wallace, the PI, was a gruff, no-nonsense man. He taught me basic techniques, how to discreetly photograph documents if I found them, how to check browser history without leaving traces, how to spot if someone was following me, though thankfully that never happened. He started tracking Mark's movements, not just to confirm the affair which was already proven, but to see who he met, where he went, what buildings he entered. Were these legitimate business meetings or something else? He also started digging into Jessica Reynolds, her background, her finances, her connection to Mark's company or family. Ms. Reed, the forensic accountant, was quiet and methodical. She needed financial records, bank statements, tax returns, business ledgers, investment portfolios. Getting these legally was impossible before filing for divorce. But Mr. Chen explained there were ways to find initial hints, publicly or through less conventional means, which could then be used as leverage or probable cause later. This is where my underestimation became key. Mark was sloppy because he thought I was oblivious. He left documents lying around sometimes. He talked on the phone in his study, assuming I was too vacant to listen or understand. His parents were the same. They discussed business matters during family dinners, never imagining I was absorbing every word like a sponge. I started finding things. Bank statements from accounts with names I didn't recognize, emails referencing offshore accounts or shell corporations, invoices for services that seemed odd, legal documents mentioning complex corporate structures. It was like putting together a puzzle where I didn't have the picture on the box. I'd photograph them quickly, secretly, and send them to Mr. Chen's secure portal. Ms. Reed would analyse them. "This looks like money being funneled through a holding company registered in Delaware," she'd report. "This matches patterns consistent with tax evasion." Or, "These transactions to an account in the Cayman Islands. They are trying to obscure the money trail." The more Ms. Reed dug, the bigger the picture became. It wasn't just Mark hiding money from me in the divorce. This was a large-scale financial operation. A network of shell companies, offshore accounts, possibly inflated invoices or fake contracts. They weren't just cheating on me, they were potentially cheating the government, business partners, and investors. And the most shocking discovery, it wasn't just Mark. His father, Robert Miller, was deeply involved. Many of the documents I found, many of the transactions Ms. Reed tracked, led back to accounts or companies controlled by Robert, or jointly by Mark and Robert. The family business wasn't just legitimate ventures. It had a significant, illegal underbelly. Jessica Reynolds wasn't just the mistress. Mr. Wallace found that one of the shell companies, a firm supposedly offering consulting services, was registered in her name. Large sums of money, millions, had flowed through that company. Was she a willing participant, or was she being used? It didn't matter. She was connected to the financial scheme, not just the bedroom one. The Miller family's wealth and success weren't built solely on hard work. A significant portion, maybe even most of it, was built on deception and fraud. And they thought I was too stupid, too weak, too isolated to ever find out. While the investigation was happening in the shadows, I was also rebuilding myself. I took an online course in forensic accounting basics. I needed to understand what Ms. Reed was talking about. I started exercising again, not just for my body, but for my mental strength. I reconnected with Emily, who became my emotional lifeline. I even started sketching again, something I hadn't done since before I met Mark. These weren't just distractions. They were affirmations of my own identity, separate from Mark, separate from the Millers. Every drawing, every mile I ran, every complex financial term I understood felt like a small victory, a piece of myself I was reclaiming. Keeping the secret was incredibly stressful. Pretending everything was normal while I was secretly dismantling my husband's life and exposing his family's crimes was exhausting. But the growing pile of evidence, the increasing confidence from my legal team, and the knowledge that I was fighting for something real fueled me. I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for justice, for vindication, for the right to stand on my own 2 feet and say, "You didn't break me." My mindset had shifted dramatically. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it was overshadowed by determination. I wasn't consumed by sadness or anger anymore, but by focus. Every condescending remark from Mark or his parents, every financial restriction, every late night he stayed out, it wasn't just pain, it was fuel. It reinforced why I was doing this. There was a strange sense of power in knowing their secrets, in watching them operate in their arrogance, while I was quietly gathering the evidence that would bring them down. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were so smart. They had no idea the person they dismissed as irrelevant was the one who would expose their rotten core. Months passed. The investigation compiled a mountain of evidence. Bank records, emails, wire transfers, property deeds, shell company registrations, photographs, witness statements. Ms. Reed's report detailing the flow of millions through illicit channels was damning. Mr. Wallace had documented Mark and Jessica's movements, but also meetings between Mark, his father, and various individuals linked to the questionable companies. Attorney Chen decided on the strategy. We wouldn't file for divorce immediately. We would wait, gather undeniable proof, and then hit them hard, not just in civil court for divorce, but potentially involving federal authorities for the financial crimes. The divorce case would be the public arena where the initial blow was struck. The opportunity came with the mandatory preliminary discovery phase in divorce proceedings. It wasn't a full trial, just a formal process where both sides exchange information and sometimes conduct depositions. Mark and his lawyer agreed to my deposition first. A deposition isn't in court. It's usually in a law firm's conference room, recorded by a court reporter. Attorney Chen chose the location, his office. The same minimalist, serious room where I had first found hope. The date was set, May 18th, 2021, over a year and a half after that fateful text message. On the morning of the deposition, I put on a simple but sharp suit. No more flowery dresses to please Mark. My hair was pulled back. I wore minimal makeup. I wanted to look capable, serious, and completely unlike the fragile woman Mark had tried to create. Mark arrived with his lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a slick, arrogant man I'd seen Mark socialise with. Mark looked smug. He probably thought this was just a formality, that I'd show up, cry a bit, demand some money, and he'd negotiate me down to almost nothing, just like his father had threatened. His father, Robert Miller, was also present, sitting in the back of the room, a silent, imposing presence, his arms crossed, a look of cold assessment on his face. They looked like conquerors, ready to divvy up the spoils. I sat across the table from Mark. He barely looked at me, focusing on his lawyer. Attorney Chen sat beside me, calm and collected. The court reporter set up her equipment. The deposition began. Mr. Thompson started, asking me routine questions about our marriage, the separation, my awareness of our finances. He was dismissive, his tone implying I knew nothing. I answered truthfully, calmly, giving simple facts, not showing any emotion. They probably thought I was a dull witness. Then it was Attorney Chen's turn to question Mark. He started mildly, questions about Mark's business, its structure, his income. Mark answered smoothly, confidently, the charming businessman persona firmly in place. He seemed relaxed. Then Chen's tone shifted, just slightly. "Mr. Miller," Chen said, looking at a file, "can you confirm the existence of MR Consulting, registered in Delaware?" Mark's smile wavered. Yes, a small consulting firm. And its primary consultant is Ms. Jessica Reynolds, correct?" Mark shifted in his seat. "Yes, she does some work for us." "And this work," Chen continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity, "involves receiving payments of, for instance, $500,000 on March 10th, 2020, $750,000 on June 15th, 2020, 2020, and $1,200,000 on September 21st, 2020, all wired from accounts linked to Miller Enterprises, despite MR Consulting having no other known clients or business activities." Mark went pale. Mr. Thompson started to object. "Objection! Relevance!" "The relevance, counsel," Chen stated coolly, "is that these payments appear to be fraudulent transfers designed to hide marital assets and potentially launder money under the guise of legitimate business expenses, using Mr. Miller's mistress as a front." Mark spluttered. "That's outrageous. Those were legitimate payments for services." Chen didn't miss a beat. "Were they? Because we have bank records showing these funds were immediately transferred from MR Consulting's account to offshore accounts, not in Ms. Reynolds' name, but in accounts linked to SK Investments, registered in the Cayman Islands. Can you explain your relationship, Mr. Miller, to SK Investments?" Mark was sweating now. Robert Miller in the back had straightened up, his face thunderous. I don't know what you're talking about," Mark stammered. "You don't?" Chen pulled out another document. "Perhaps this wire transfer instruction, signed with your signature, for $3 million from a Miller Enterprises account to SK Investments, dated 2 days after the initial text message that prompted this action, might refresh your memory." He slid the document across the table. Mark stared at it, his face ashen. "And speaking of SK Investments," Chen continued, raising his voice slightly, looking directly at Robert Miller. We've also noted several large transfers from SK Investments to accounts registered to Mr. Robert Miller. Would you care to explain the flow of these millions of dollars, Mr. Miller Sr.? Robert Miller surged forward. This is defamation. You have no right. My son's finances are his business. When those finances involve potential tax evasion, money laundering, and hiding assets that should be subject to division in a divorce, they become our business, and soon, perhaps, the business of federal investigators, Chen said, his voice like steel. Then came the final blow, the one they never saw coming. Mr. Miller, Chen addressed Mark again, we have compiled extensive documentation, ledgers, emails, bank records, and sworn statements from former employees and business associates who were aware of these activities, detailing a pattern of financial fraud within Miller Enterprises dating back over 10 years. Based on this preliminary evidence, which shows millions of dollars funneled through illicit channels, my client has authorized me to inform you that we have already submitted a formal report, along with supporting documentation, to the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network this morning. The air left the room. Mark gasped a choked sound. His lawyer, Mr. Thompson, looked absolutely horrified, turning to Mark with wide, panicked eyes. Robert Miller looked like he was about to have a heart attack, his face purple with rage and fear. You reported us? Mark stammered, disbelief warring with terror. We initiated contact and provided preliminary evidence, Chen confirmed calmly. They are now looking into the matter. Should you fail to reach a reasonable settlement agreement regarding the divorce proceedings that reflects the true value of the marital estate, including the illicitly gained assets, we will provide them with the full, detailed report. And given the scale of the apparent fraud and the involvement of multiple parties and offshore entities, I believe the consequences would be severe, not just financially, but legally. He looked at Robert Miller. Including potential charges of aiding and abetting Mr. Miller Sr. The room was silent except for the faint clicking of the court reporter's machine. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. They weren't just facing a divorce anymore. They were facing the complete collapse of their empire, built on a foundation of lies, exposed by the woman they thought was too insignificant to notice. The deposition ended abruptly. Mark and his father huddled with their lawyer, their faces a mask of panic. Attorney Chen and I left, quietly victorious. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The formal divorce proceedings began, but the power dynamic had shifted completely. Mark and his family were no longer in control. They were scrambling. Their lawyers, now including high-priced criminal defense specialists, were trying desperately to assess the damage and contain the situation. The threat of the federal investigation hung over them like the sword of Damocles. They knew we had the evidence, and they knew I was prepared to use it if they didn't cooperate. The Miller family, who had always valued reputation above all else, was now facing public humiliation and potential ruin. While the IRS and FinCEN investigations were confidential, rumours started to spread. Whispers about financial irregularities at Miller Enterprises appeared in business journals. Social invitations dried up. The perfect facade of the Miller family began to crack publicly. Mark, the man who thought he could discard me and my financial security so easily, was now desperate to settle, not just to minimise his losses in the divorce, but to potentially avoid criminal charges or crippling fines. The settlement negotiations were intense, but swift. Mark and Robert Miller knew they were cornered. They couldn't risk the full weight of a federal investigation. Sarah Miller, the wife who hadn't worked in 15 years, the woman they threatened would get nothing, walked away with a settlement that was far beyond a standard divorce. based on the true, unearthed value of the marital assets, including a significant portion of the previously hidden funds and assets traceable to their joint efforts during the marriage. I received not only our primary residence free and clear, but also substantial financial assets, investment properties, and a share of Miller Enterprises' legitimate assets. The final amount was staggering, easily putting me in a position of significant wealth and complete financial independence. As part of the settlement, Mark also had to formally acknowledge his financial misconduct, though the details remained sealed in the divorce case to protect their reputation. Somewhat from public divorce records, it didn't protect them from the federal agencies. I don't know the full extent of the consequences Mark and his father faced from the federal agencies. That happened behind closed doors. But I heard through the grapevine, from hushed tones in the city's financial circles, about massive fines levied against Miller Enterprises and against Robert and Mark individually. There were whispers of forced divestitures, restructuring, and close government oversight. Their empire wasn't completely destroyed, but it was significantly crippled, and their reputations were permanently stained. Jessica Reynolds was also investigated, though I never found out if she faced charges or was simply used and then discarded by the Millers. My own reputation, which they tried to drag through the mud, was quietly, powerfully restored. People saw that I hadn't just filed for divorce. I had uncovered massive corruption. I was no longer seen as the dumped, weak wife, but as a woman of resilience, intelligence, and integrity who fought for justice. Winning wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming myself. With financial security, I finally had the freedom to choose my own path. I went back to school, got my degree in interior design, and started my own firm, specializing in creating beautiful, functional spaces that felt like home, not just a showcase of wealth and pretense. It thrived. I sold the big house in Greenwood Lakes. It held too many bad memories. I bought a smaller place downtown, a loft with big windows and a view of the city lights. It felt like a symbol of my new life. Open, independent, looking forward. I didn't remarry. I dated casually, enjoying the freedom. But the experience with Mark taught me valuable lessons about trust, about partnership, and about the importance of standing entirely on your own 2 feet, financially and emotionally. Looking back, that text message, the one that felt like the end of my world, was actually the beginning. It was the catalyst that forced me to see the truth, to find my strength, and to fight for the life I deserved. The pain was immense, the betrayal was deep, and the fight was terrifying. But the feeling of walking away, head held high, financially independent, and having delivered a definitive blow against those who tried to destroy me, that feeling was liberation. It was justice. It was triumph. My journey from that perfect dinner table to where I am today was long and brutal. I lost a husband, a family I thought was mine, and a life I had built. But in return, I found myself. I found my resilience. I found my power. And I proved that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all. I got my financial freedom back, and I helped bring a measure of justice to people who thought they were above the law. Now, I have a question for you. Knowing everything I went through, the betrayal, the abuse, the financial control, the scale of their deception, and how they tried to leave me with nothing. If you were in my shoes, after winning the legal and financial battle, securing your independence, and knowing they faced significant consequences for their actions, would you choose to A. Put it all behind you completely, move on, and never look back at them, focusing solely on your new life and happiness? Or B. Despite securing your own future, would you still want to ensure they faced the maximum possible consequences, Maybe even pushing for criminal charges if the initial reports didn't lead to that, to make sure they truly paid for the damage they caused, not just to you, but potentially to others? Think about it. What would you do?